Take a look at this. A long, thin, curious little sand strip just sitting there on the Caspian Sea's southeastern shores. From far away it looks empty, just a dull sandbar with a bit of green scrub on it. But if you zoom in further on satellite maps, you find some odd structures. Skeletons of buildings, 2 helipads, weird tracks, radio masts. Upon seeing this, I knew there might be a tale or two about this place. So, of course, I went down a massive rabbit hole to find out and piece together everything I could about it. Sources were thin, mostly in Russian and Turkmen, a mishmash of centuries-old expedition logs, forgotten photographer archives and government websites. It took some proper probing and poking around, but what I unearthed is that this windy little sandbar holds some mad stories. Today, we're going to find out the full story of Ogurjaly Island. So let's load up Google Earth and look around the island a little bit. Starting at the Caspian Sea, it's the world's largest inland water body. It's basically Earth's biggest lake. Its shores touch Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Iran. Ogurjaly Island sits in its southeastern corner, about 13 kilometres off the Turkmenistan mainland, and about 30 kilometres away from anything actually labelled. It's about 42 kilometres long and only a few kilometres wide. It's basically the Chile of sandbars. I tried to see if there were any labelled landmarks on it on Google Maps, but there are basically none, except for a few odd ones. A hiking area here called Sally Style with a busy times bar chart. Something called Alma Bay here with a little boat speeding through it, but no matches for anything on it on a Google search. A building here labelled this in Persian, which translates to Wehrmacht Factory. Obviously fake. Some green water here called Miracle Lake, again with no Google results. The island itself has some pretty funny reviews. This ominous one in Turkish. This one here about visiting with grandma. Turkmenistan was part of the Soviet Union and Yandex Maps is more used in post-Soviet Union countries. But even that didn't have any more landmarks labelled. Neither does Apple Maps. Map Carter almost always shows labels that are not on other maps, but that doesn't have anything more either. As I showed earlier, there are structures on the island. Some destroyed buildings on the northern tip, another little lake here, some odd geometric structures here on the island's shoreline, an intact building here a bit further south with helipads and tracks. Towards the island's south side we have this red mast or antenna, and on the island's south tip there are some buildings with a lighthouse. Google Earth historical view shows that the island has shifted its shape over time, especially the northern tip. As a bonus for this episode, I also found these odd structures in the middle of the sea nearby, about 40 kilometres to the north, so we're also going to find out what those are today. So since there are no labels to look at on maps, my first stop was none other than the Ogurjaly Island Wikipedia article, which is a bit empty. It says it's the largest island in both Turkmenistan and the Caspian Sea, that it's made up of sand dunes and bushes, and it confirms that the northern end was broken up by waves. Some basic info about where it is. At this point I wanted to know about the island's history, and on Wikipedia it mentions something. I'm keeping this a secret now though, because it's just a rough overview without much detail, but worry not, curious watcher, all will be laid bare soon enough. There's a wee bit more information in the Russian one, since Turkmenistan used to be part of the Soviet Union, really not that much more than in the English one. So since the Wikipedia articles are so empty, I had to stitch together the sources myself. Whenever I look at these little sandbars, I always wonder how long they've stood for. It looks like they just get swept away over time by undersea currents, so it always surprises me when I find out that they've actually stood for hundreds of years. I wanted to dig up evidence as to when Ogurjaly Island first comes up in historical records, to see how long it's truly been there for. If it has been there for long, then it's likely been known about by anyone living anywhere near it, probably for thousands of years before anyone wrote anything down. It's not absurdly far from the mainland, so any nearby human tribe capable of building any kind of boat could have found it and used it. Even the Greeks in the 400s BC knew about the Caspian and that it was closed, thanks to Herodotus, who wrote about it in his histories book, though he doesn't talk about any islands. Ukrainian Wikipedia gives us our first clue, saying something about the island existing since the year 1221, but with no source, though it seems related to Muhammad II, one of the Khwarezmian Empire leaders, who is said to have died of pleurisy on a Caspian Sea island in the early 1200s. There's a drawn manuscript from the 1400s of his death, clearly on a small, thin sandbar with a tree and some shrubs. Could have been Ogurjaly Island, sure, but then again, could have been any other Caspian Sea sandbar, or even one that no longer exists. Russian Wikipedia is our next stop, with sources saying it's been known about since 1392 as a tribe settlement, and that its name comes from the Turkmen Ogurjaly tribe. There's a theory that they formed from Turkmen fugitives and nomads who took part in sea piracy. The word Ogurjaly is said to mean thief. None of this, though, is outright evidence of the island's existence back then. Even if it was there, the Caspian Sea shoreline has risen and fallen over time, so Ogurjaly Island could have changed shape entirely or came and went. These are our first clues to work with, though, so it's food for thought before we get into the juicier stories. The 1500s is when we get a wee bit closer to finding writings about Ogurjaly Island. At this time, there was a well-known English traveller and merchant called Anthony Jenkinson, who actually became the first English ambassador to Russia. He travelled there and through Central Asia many times and gave some of the earliest detailed European eyewitness accounts of the Caspian Sea in his 1558 expedition. Some of his Caspian travel tales were compiled in a book called The Principal Navigations, Voyages, Traffics and Discoveries of the English Nation by a writer called Richard Hakluyt. He wrote that Jenkinson came up to a sand spit and on its southeastern side there were two islands visible from the sea. He said it then sloped to the northeast and formed another bay that flowed into the River Gem. But that's a big clue that he wasn't actually near Ogurjaly Island. That river is in the Caspian's northeast, not the southeast. So Anthony Jenkinson didn't see Ogurjaly Island. His maps of Russia helped make the Theatrium Orbis Terrarum by Ortelius, though. You can see the Caspian Sea on these maps, but no islands within. Despite that, it's really worth reading about his travels. He was a truly fascinating European pioneer of this area with some mega stories. His Wikipedia article is full of detail. His grave is no longer marked, but he's supposedly buried at Holy Trinity Parish Church in T, Rutland. Over half a century after Anthony Jenkinson's time in 1627, there was a book published called Kniga Balshomu Cherteju, the Big Drawing Book. Basically a detailed description of 16th and 17th century Moscow kingdom maps. Tsar Ivan Vasilievich wanted it made because the maps they were using were falling apart, so he wanted to immortalise them. The book doesn't say much about the Caspian Sea or its islands, but it came out a few years before some big Russian Caspian Sea expeditions. As far as I understand, getting from Russia to India back then was really tough. There weren't many good or safe ones because of wars, bandits and geography. The Russians were becoming more and more interested in the Caspian, trying to find out if there were better river routes there, or even reroute some rivers to make a route. There were also rumours of a mythical river of gold around there, so as you can imagine, they wanted to go find it. Decades after the book was published in 1699, Tsar Peter the Great ordered a great Caspian Sea expedition, led by a guy called Eberhard Meyer. From this expedition, they drew up a map. There's not much detail online about it though, and it was never published. It also focused more on the North Caspian, so we'll never know if they saw Ogurjaly Island, just like with Anthony Jenkinson. Still no mention of our curious little sandbar yet, but we're getting nearer. Another Caspian Sea expedition was ordered by Tsar Peter the Great in 1714, this time led by a guy called Alexander Bekovich Cherkassky. Alexander was tasked with drawing up a new map of the Caspian's eastern coast and finding exactly where the Amu Darya estuary was. So he went, did it, and mapped it, and was given a big fat promotion to the rank of guards captain for his work. Very fancy. Because of his success, Peter the Great gave him a huge army with a bunch of soldiers, specialists and ships, along with orders to go after a few strategic objectives. Build up fortified positions along the eastern shores, look again into river routes towards India, see whether or not the Amu Darya could be shifted, and persuade the Khanate of Khiva to become allies with Russia. In 1717, he and about 3,000 men moved down through Atirau in Kazakhstan and eventually got to Lake Aybugir in Turkmenistan, but there met a huge Kievan army who ended up killing Alexander and a ton of his men. Sounds like they didn't really fancy being mates with the Russians. Sadly, the map he made was lost to time, and there's still no record of him mentioning any sandbar, let alone Ogurjaly Island. We are getting closer though. There was another Caspian expedition ordered afterwards, and this time its map did survive. In the early 1700s, while Eberhard Meyer and Alexander Bekovich Cherkassky were mapping the Caspian Sea, there was a war happening in 1703 at the Neva River. There was a Dutch navigator on the Swedish schooner Astrid called Carl van Verden, and during the war he was wounded and taken captive by the Russians. Peter the Great personally asked for him to be taken care of and brought back to full health, then convinced him to join his Russian army. The sources I read didn't say why, but he was probably a very skilled navigator and mapmaker, exactly what Peter the Great needed. In 1719, after Alexander Bekovich Cherkassky was killed, Carl van Verden was tasked with mapping the Caspian in much greater detail, along with a hydrographer, Fyodor Soimonov. They were told to say they were only going for trading purposes. The Russians probably didn't want anyone getting to that much sought after river route to India or the mythical Golden River before they could. Karl and Fyodor came back in 1720 with results and a map. There are a few variants of it, but every one of them shows Ogurjaly Island. It seems to more or less match the modern Caspian eastern coast on satellite. This is our first piece of written evidence and finally proves that it's existed since at least 1719 for over 300 years. They didn't talk about what was going on there at the time though, so I wanted to find out more about that. This source says in 1744 the Turkmen down there asked the Russians to build a fortress on the island for trading and to be accepted as Russians. Officials were sent out to look into it, but denied them. It doesn't say why, but I looked into it and came to this conclusion. All Ogurjaly Island Wikipedia articles say around this time the island was used by pirates called Alaman or Almen, who ambushed and plundered merchant caravans to steal goods and take slaves. Merchants were likely scared of going there, so the Turkmen would find it hard to sell anything. The Turkmen also had the Persians on their backs. Russian rule would back them up with some blackmail firepower. They could basically threaten Persians and pirates by saying, if you come down here, we'll call the bloody Russians on you to sort you out. Russia, despite saying no, were interested in the island because their own people were being captured as slaves there and their own caravans were getting plundered. Even if they did find a river route to India down there, it would be hard to convince anyone to go. However, they supposedly thought the Caspian Turkmen were few in number, disorganised, disobedient. They didn't trust them. The island is sandy, barren, with no fresh water or wood to build with. A fortress would have been expensive and only for temporary use. It also would have annoyed the Persians and Ottomans. They probably didn't want to rock the boat. The Caspian Turkmen asked Russia again in 1767, but got told no for the same reasons. Eventually, the Russians did decide to do something about it. In 1781, they sent a guy called Count Marko Voinovich down there with a bunch of ships to go find a good spot to set up a military outpost down there to finally safeguard Russian shipping across the Caspian and as a stronghold for any upcoming potential trade route to India. He went from Astrakhan to Astrabad Bay in the southeastern Caspian, and he did look at Ogurjaly Island as a candidate. When he got there though, he was convinced it wasn't worth it because it was so sandy and barren. He gave up on it and instead went to Gorgan Bay in modern-day Iran to set up the fortification there. The leaders there received the Russians well, but soon after they started to get fearful and paranoid of the fort being built. Persians and Turkmen hadn't been able to settle together for hundreds of years, so they were likely wary of the Russians making ties with the Turkmen. Don't forget that the Turkmen Ogurjaly pirates had been a massive ball ache for Persia for ages, plundering their ships and taking them as slaves. Voinovich and his crew were tricked into coming further inland away from the fortification, captured, then told to take apart everything they'd built. The Persian area leaders wanted to renegotiate, though Voinovich said he'd need to go back to Russia to discuss their terms, and was eventually let go and sailed back to Russia in 1782. He, of course, now distrusted the Persians who had betrayed him. At this point, it seems Russia left the idea of controlling the southeastern Caspian and focused more on the northern part, and as such, Ogurjaly Island stayed a piracy and slavery hotspot. Despite all that had happened, the Russians didn't just go home with their tails between their legs. They got busy with a war from 1804 to 1813 with Qajar Persia, which the Russians ended up winning. The Treaty of Gulistan was signed to bring peace, and part of its terms were that Persia could no longer keep warships on the Caspian or sail on it. It was effectively now free for Russia. They could finally look back into finding routes to India, making ties with the Turkmen, and fulfilling Peter the Great's idea from 100 years back. They sorted out another Caspian expedition in 1819 led by Nikolai Muravyov, hoping for a better outcome than last time. He spoke Turkic languages and had first-hand experience with dodgy Asian negotiations without getting his head chopped off. His orders were to make friendly contact with the Caspian Turkmen and to scout the whole southeastern coastline for a good spot to build a safe Russian trading post again. Muravyov didn't land on Ogurjaly Island, but he did pass it. In summer it was empty except for sheep grazing, and in winter a few Turkmen would move over with their flocks and use sea ice for drinking water. On the northern end, he spotted a weird monument made of 4 tall trees tied together. He met with the Turkmen tribes and then headed inland by camel caravan, trying to blend in with his Turkmen guides to not be detected or given any grief. He went back to Russia and recommended building the trading post at Krasnovodsk Bay instead of on Ogurjaly Island. They were giving up on the island a bit by now. In the 1830s, they sent out another Caspian expedition led by Russian naturalist Grigory Karelin, basically finishing off Muravyov's work. He sailed along the Turkmen coast and actually landed on Ogurjaly Island in May 1836. He described it the same as Muravyov did. Mostly uninhabited, a few Turkmen families living there in winter under a local chief. In spring they planted watermelons, melons and cucumbers before leaving their horses, goats and sheep to graze there for 8 months. He said it was covered in good bushes for firewood, had decent pastures, good landing spots for ships. Overall, he saw potential in it for farming, but like the guys before him, he confirmed that it was too isolated for a base and with limited resources. Much like Muravyov's expedition, Karelin's expedition didn't end in a fort being built either. They found another use for the island in the late 1800s though. They built a leper colony on its northern end, like a small quarantine camp with basic houses. Leprosy is an infectious bacterial disease that leads to some really grim and grisly injuries and even disfigurement if untreated. It's easy to see why people were so scared of catching leprosy from sufferers. I couldn't find out whether or not the lepers were taken off the island or simply left for dead. Either way, storm waves eventually chewed up the northern tip and destroyed their settlement. This is what those ruined buildings are that you can see on Google Earth, the remains of the old leper colony. I found a photographer called Alexei 56 who visited it in the 1980s and took photos. He found old belongings scattered in the sand, which sadly suggests that they weren't taken off the island but simply left there to die, but we can't be 100% sure. For a while, there was supposedly one last guy living out there alone, an old hermit called Kerim Aga. Just look at that magnificent hairline. He survived on fish and occasional helicopter drops, but no one knows if he left the island or even when he died. Alexei 56's photos are the only first-hand sources that I could actually find on this. After this, not much happened on Ogurjaly Island again until 1963. The Soviet Union was ruling the roost then, and they built a lighthouse on the island's southern tip. Shipping across the Caspian was increasing and ships needed a beacon to stay away from the island and its low sandy shores. A few decades later, in 1982, the Soviets turned the island into a zakaznik, basically a dedicated nature reserve. On the Turkmen mainland, goitered gazelle populations were declining sharply because of hunting, habitat loss, and competition with livestock. So Soviet scientists brought in 12 or 13 of them over to Ogurjaly Island, where there were no predators, plenty of food, and zero human disturbance. Their population exploded, and today about 2,000 of them roam the whole island. In 1990, they made it part of the much bigger Hazar State Nature Reserve to give it even stronger legal protection. They built a border guard outpost next to the 1963 lighthouse. Turkmen border guards use it to patrol for smuggling, illegal fishing and poaching in the protected Caspian waters. And this is all still true today for Ogurjaly Island. It's a nature sanctuary with a lighthouse and border guards on it. Going back to Google Earth, we have the lighthouse and the border guard buildings on the island's south tip. You can see some boats patrolling the area on Apple Maps. And this is likely a radio mast for communications back to the mainland. The tracks are probably from the border guards walking or driving along them. I dug as hard as I could for some sources on this building with the 2 helipads near it, but I honestly couldn't find anything on it. You can see an antenna or watchtower near it, so it's either another border guard building or a research station. Of course, at the north end of the island we can see the destroyed buildings from the leper colony. I didn't find anything on what these strange structures are near the leper colony, but they do look a bit like the wooden legged buildings I saw on Alexei 58's photos. Could also be coastal fish traps, or even just a jetty for fishermen to sit on and fish in the bay. And, as promised, I'll tell you what these weird structures are to the north of the island. This one was much easier. They are oil and gas drilling stations, part of the Cheliken contract area. You can find articles about oil and gas drilling in the eastern Caspian off Turkmenistan and find pictures of these platforms which look about the right shape and size. As for the island's name, I've been calling it Ogurjaly Island. In Turkmen, it's this.
Ogurjaly Adası.
Wikipedia lists it in English as Ogurja, and I wanted to know why they didn't just use the Turkmen name. In Turkmen, Ogurja is the name of the island's pirate tribe. They add li on the end, like how we add ish in English, so Ogurjaly is Ogurja-ish. Ada is island in Turkmen, and the C suffix is like saying their island in English. It seems when they wanted an English name, they just took off all the Turkmen grammar off the words and were left with Ogurja Ada and stuck with that. Some call it Ogurchinsky Island because in Russia it's Ogurchinsky Ostrov. They called it that because Ogurja sounds a bit like Oguriets, which is the Russian for cucumber. And the island also somewhat looks like a cucumber in shape. It's just a coincidence though. Interestingly, there are about 65 plant species on Ogurjaly Island. The most common are milkvetch, bindweed, reeds and tamarisk. 120 bird species have been recorded there, but hundreds of them from Russia and Kazakhstan migrate there for the winter. Coots, red-headed and red-billed ducks, swans and flamingos are commonly found in the shallow waters. Caspian seals are also found here, one of 2 freshwater seal species in the world and the smallest too. Adult Caspian seals average about 1.5 metres in length. And that's the full story of Ogurjaly Island. Honestly, when I first zoomed in on this random sandbar, I thought it was going to be a quick 5-minute video. Turns out, it took me ages to piece everything together from scattered Russian and Turkmen sources, but I'm really glad I did. What an adventure it's been. From pirate hideout to windswept leper colony to a quiet sanctuary full of 2,000 wild gazelles and seabirds. Just goes to show that even the most dull-looking places on Google Earth can have some of the maddest backstories hiding behind them. Thanks for coming down the rabbit hole with me. Let me know if you know anything about Ogurjaly Island, if you've ever been there, if I missed anything, or if you just enjoyed the video. Let me know if there's a place you want me to dig into next, and I'll add it to my list. And see you in the next video.